Hi, I'm Adam Burton, the pastor at Central Baptist Church. Thank you for checking out this sermon. I pray that it encourages you and helps you to grow closer to Jesus. While as grateful as I am for you, please don't allow this message to keep you from connecting with a local church. If you're in our area, we would love for you to check us out at Central Baptist Church. God bless. Well, it was in March of 1963, when there was an 18-year-old girl was forcibly grabbed by a man as she was walking home from the bus stop after she was working late at night at a movie theater in Phoenix, Arizona. The attacker, he grabbed her and brought her into his car. He tied her hands behind her back and forced her to lie down in the back seat. He's driving around town for about 20 minutes or so, and then he leaves the city, gets outside, and he rapes her. He demanded that she give him all of her money, and he told her to lie down again back in the back seat, and then he drove her back into the city, and he dropped her off blocks from where she lived. I can't imagine the pain and the suffering, the humiliation that this young lady went through. And through the investigation, they finally found out who it was, and a man was arrested for the crime. But you can imagine, it was dark, it was tough. The young lady, the victim, couldn't identify the suspect. So they put a four-person lineup, you can picture in the movies, and she couldn't identify who it was. Yet, the police made after it was over, the police kind of connivingly talked to the suspect, making him think that she did point him out. So the suspect was interrogated for over 2 hours without a lawyer present. In fact, he ended up writing his confession to the crime, and he was convicted. In his appeal, the defendant's lawyer claimed that this man's Fifth and Sixth Amendment rights were violated. And in 1966, the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Ernesto Miranda's conviction on the grounds that his rights to due process were violated. You may not be familiar with the name Ernesto Miranda, but I'm sure that you've probably heard this statement before. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in the court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. Do you understand the rights I have just read to you? With these rights in mind, do you wish to speak to me? And there's a lot of information that a police officer has to memorize. You have numbers and codes and names and acronyms. But in order to graduate from the police academy, you must recall so much of this information from memory. However, they won't let you out of the academy if you recite the Miranda warning from memory. No. Every police officer carries a card on their person that has the Miranda rights on it. And it must be read verbatim. You can't mess it up. Because if you get a word wrong or here, if you mess it up, then cases have been overturned. Why is that? Because our nation values due process under the law. That might seem a little extreme. I mean, especially since Miranda was retried and he was convicted of the crime. He was guilty. He had confessed to another girlfriend of his. But you might say that Miranda doesn't deserve due process. And, he did the crime and he did pay the time. But if there's anyone that deserves due process more than anyone else, the history of mankind, this person did not get it. And as you can probably guess, it is Jesus Christ. So we're going to see that in our passage this morning. Look here, verses 12 through 17 of John chapter 18. So the band of soldiers and their captain and the officers of the Jews arrested Jesus, and they bound him. First, they led him to Annas, for he was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year. It was Caiaphas who had advised the Jews that it would be expedient that one man should die for the people. Simon Peter followed Jesus, and so did another disciple. Since that disciple was known to the high priest, he entered with Jesus into the courtyard of the high priest. But Peter stood outside at that door. So the other disciple, who was known to that high priest, went out and spoke to the servant girl who kept watch at the door and brought Peter in. The servant girl at the door said to Peter, "You also are not one of this man's disciples, are you?" He said, "I am not." Now the servants and the officers had made a charcoal fire because it was cold, and they were standing and there we go, warming themselves. Peter also was with them, standing and warming himself. The high priest then questioned Jesus about his disciples and his teaching, and Jesus answered him, I have spoken openly to the world. I have always taught in synagogues and in the temple where all the Jews come together. I have said nothing in secret. Why do you ask me? Ask those who have heard me, and what I said to them, they know what I said. And when he had said these things, one of the officers standing by struck at Jesus with his hand, saying, "Is that how you answer the high priest?" Jesus answered him, "If what I said was wrong, bear witness about the wrong. But if what I said was right, why do you strike me?" Annas then sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. Now Simon Peter was standing and warming himself, and so they said to him, "You also are not one of his disciples, are you?" He denied it and said, "I am not." One of the servants of the high priest, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, asked, "Did I not see you in the garden with him?" Peter again denied it, and at once a rooster crowed. May God bless the reading of his holy word. This message this morning titled, "Who's on Trial?" The overarching message that we're going to see in this is that it is real faith that strengthens Christians. Real faith strengthens the Christians. And we're going to see this in a couple of ways. One, we're going to see the danger of a false faith. The danger of a false faith, but also the hope that we have in perfect faith. A danger of false faith, hope on a perfect faith. Now, what is faith? Well, right, the author of Hebrews describes it this way. Now, faith is the assurance of things that are hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. Now, what does faith have to do with this scene that we have here in this high priest house with Jesus somewhat standing trial for accusations made against him? Well, there's a couple of scenes that we have just read about, and several key characters that are in this passage, and so some well-known names that we have heard of, right? We have obviously Jesus, might say the center of this passage. Then we've got disciple. We have Simon Peter, who is with them, but also we have the other religious leaders. We have guards, and then we have a couple of names that are spelled out here. We have Annas and Caiaphas. Now, there's probably no higher seat in all of Judaism than that of the high priest. It is not just a position of religious authority, but it was a place of legal authority as well. Now, the high priest was a position that was given for life. Not a great comparison, but think of it in Catholic Church with the Pope. All right, so the Pope is appointed by the College of Cardinals and serves till life, or, and we saw, in the last several years, he can abdicate his role and, I guess, go off into retirement, which typically does not happen. But in the case here, we have two names, and both of them were called the high priest. We have Annas, who is the one that Jesus appears before, but then we have another name in verse 24 of Caiaphas, who Annas sends him off to. Now, the high priest must come from the lineage of the high priestly family. And in this sense here, Annas is kind of the patriarch of the high priestly family. Annas served as the high priest from AD 6 to AD 15. Now, he was, appointed as high priest for life, but we also know that in the first century that the Jews did not rule their lives solely. Right? They were under the Roman Empire. And so the Romans, while they allowed great autonomy to the Jewish people, they still were able to place people in authority in certain ways. And so you saw a lot of dirty politics. So you would see bribing of the Roman officials to allow a certain, and a lot of this happened within the same family. But Annas was a well-respected high priest, and he had 5 sons, and they too became priests. And one of those was not biological, but he was his son-in-law, was Caiaphas. Now, Caiaphas served the longest of any of the high priests. He served 18 years, from AD 18 to AD 36. But even though Caiaphas was the legal authority at this time, many of the Jews still considered Annas to be their high priest. What's interesting is the name Annas means to clement or merciful. But what we see here in this passage is nothing like clemency or mercy. Now, you might wonder, why is it that Jesus appeared before Annas before he went to the real high priest, Caiaphas? Is it that Annas has seen Jesus and he saw what he would do, and he wanted to interrogate him for himself before he sent, or maybe did Caiaphas want to shirk his responsibility and say, hey, you know what, Annas, you seek him out and then you determine whether or not we should proceed with putting him to death? Well, one thing's for certain is that what we see taking place here in these verses is not a trial. This was not a sanctioned trial that Jesus was going through on his way to be presented to the Roman authorities. This was not due process. So Jesus is bound from being taken from the Garden of Eden with Simon Peter. And they go into this house where Annas is sitting. And he is asked questions that he should not be asked. For in the legal system in this time, you would not question the defendant, the one that is accused. You would seek out witnesses to determine whether or not the claims made against them were valid. And so we see that here in verses 19 through 21. The high priest then questioned Jesus about his disciples and his teaching. So he shouldn't be questioning him at all. But also, look what he questions him. He doesn't question him about anything that he is doing. He's questioning him about the disciples and his teaching to them. And look at his response. He says, basically, kind of, put my own words in it. Why are you asking me this? Look, I've spoken everything openly. I've taught. I've done nothing in secret. I taught in the synagogues and the temples where everybody could hear me. Nothing I said was in secret. And look, he says, why do you ask me? Ask those who have heard me what I said to them. They know what I said. It's kind of like Jesus kind of pushing back in a correct way, saying what is taking place here is wrong. What is taking place is wrong. Why are you asking me? You should ask the witnesses, for they know what I said. So these questions asked toward Jesus, he was being questioned in bad faith. Right? He should not be before Annas, and he should not be questioned in the manner with he is. And to be honest, we do the same thing. We question Jesus in bad faith, especially those unbelievers will use Jesus' words against Christians. Like we should pull out certain verses. Key is, we shouldn't judge anybody for anything because Jesus said, don't judge, although that's twisting his words, which is what the Jews did to Jesus. They don't believe in Jesus, but yet they will use his words to make Christians to look bad. But we, even as believers, also use Jesus' words as weapons. We should just forgive and forget. You need to move beyond what any sin, but never addressing the sin at all. Maybe you saw in my email that in the Central Connection, also included in the video, the sad issues that are going on within the Southern Baptist Convention right now regarding sexual abuse. Last Sunday, there was a almost 300-page report that came from an independent investigation into a very small scope within our convention into how a certain group of people handled accusations of abuse. And not to go into too much detail into that report, but what we found is that it was bad. And at every turn and point, we see that those that were in leadership chose to protect the institution at the expense of harming the victims. And thankfully, and we'll see where it leads, I'm afraid this is just the tip of the iceberg, but over the last few years at the annual meeting, the messengers of the convention have said, look, we want transparency. We need to air the dirty laundry so that we can repent and so that we can move on from this. But just to kind of show you an example of how we, just as the Jews twisted the words to really to put our faith in something else. The same day that report was issued, a pastor up in Indiana, at the end of the service, made a confession saying that he had committed adultery 20 years ago. And he kept it quiet, and at the end, and it was a well-read statement, and he asked for forgiveness of the church, and he said he was wrong and all of it. And at the end of it, the church stood up and applauded him. And then a young lady and a man walked up to the front, and she said, what you said was a lie. It's like, I am that person. You didn't commit adultery 20 years ago. It was actually 27 years ago. No, when I was 16 years old, you abused me in your office and repeatedly did so for 9 years. You can see how we can twist words to make us look better or other. And And look, we see that, and we've seen that in our own convention. Well, we need to keep things quiet. We need to get non-disclosure agreements signed in order to protect the cause. If we find ourselves liable, even though we're destroying lives along the way, it's going to harm evangelism. It's going to take money away from the cooperative program, and we won't be able to get the gospel to the ends of the earth. Even when I have my own missions professors of mine who are those that are teaching men and women to go on the field that are they themselves abusing women. And what we find is, sadly, the church in many ways is not much different than the Sanhedrin was centuries prior. For, look, they were noble if we can be noble in a sinful sense. They were protecting their way of life. Jesus came to disrupt that. He came to really turn the church up on its head because it was not the way it was supposed to be. For they believed it was the law that saved them. Whereas Jesus said, no, he is the way, the truth, and the life. And so what did the Jews do? They killed Jesus. So much that, interesting that John includes in here that it was Caiaphas, the one that said that we needed to put him away. It's better for one man to die for the sake of us all. And in the same way, we as the church, if we put our faith, hope, and trust in our institution instead of Jesus, one, we're seeing the carnage that's left along the way, but also we see that God does not honor that. And so we see that we must place our faith in the right thing. My faith is, be a Baptist till I die because I believe in the theology of it. But Jesus didn't die for the Southern Baptist Convention. He didn't die for the North American Mission Board or the International Mission Board. No, he died for sinners. We must realize we are sinners in need of grace. We also see here that our attention turns to one of Jesus' disciples, Simon Peter. Now, Peter is a complicated fellow. He's up and down. He's all over the place. And the scene prior to this we saw last week, Jesus is taking his sword out, chopping the ear off in order to protect Jesus. But we see here next is that now that when it looks like things are getting bad, Peter denies Jesus. He denies him. And what's interesting is look how strong Peter was just a few verses prior, a few minutes before this takes place. All right, we talked about Roman soldiers, Jewish officers all around, and he pulls out a sword and chops off the ear of one of the slaves. But now we see in verse 16, Peter stands outside. And there's this servant girl who was watching the door. Far cry from a Roman soldier in armor. What does Jesus say when she says, "Are you not also one of this man's disciples?" He says, "I am not." Now, what I find interesting is we contrast that with what Jesus said earlier when he was questioned, "Are you not the Son of God?" In verse 8 it says, "I told you that I am he. So if you seek me, let these men go." Jesus confessed, he told the truth in order to protect his disciples. But yet on the flip side here, Peter denies Jesus in order to protect himself. So much so that it says that as it got cold that evening, Peter would, not want to be. He goes out with the other servants as they lit a fire in the courtyard, and he's hanging out with them. And it's interesting, as they were cold and warming themselves, he was standing, warming with them. I think John includes this for a reason. One is to show how even Jesus' own disciples can place their faith in the wrong thing. The weakness of faith. And when we put our faith in not the thing of in Jesus Christ, our rock and our salvation, we see that when things get tough, when times get hard, who are you going to align yourself with? I mean, it's almost as if Peter has become one of them. Not just staying away. He didn't run away. No, he joined the other side. He joined the other side. So in this passage, the question I ask is, who is on trial? Who's on trial? Is it Jesus? Well, yes, right? He's the one that is bound up in chains. He is the defendant. And as he answers Annas' questions, it says that he sends him on to Caiaphas. And we're going to look in the next weeks of Jesus before the high priest. He's going to go before the Roman governor, Pilate. And then he's going to continue on until his death on the cross. But Jesus isn't the only one on trial. So is Annas, the Sanhedrin. So is Peter. And so are you and me. We are all on trial. And the trial is where is our faith? Where do we align? What is our allegiance? See, Jesus, of those 3 and 4, if you include us, is the only one that is innocent. The only one, really, who doesn't deserve to be put on a trial. But we shouldn't feel sympathy for him. For Jesus was bound, beaten, ridiculed, and crucified so that we don't have to stay on trial. Annas, Sanhedrin, rejected Jesus, and they were condemned. The good news is Peter was guilty of abandoning Jesus when he should have been there most. But Peter was pardoned. And we see that when the Holy Spirit came, Peter repented of his sin. And he lived for Christ to the end. It was Peter that Jesus said, "On this rock I will build my church." But what about you? What about you? Where does your faith lie? Does it lie in yourself? Does it lie in rituals, in our religion, in our faith? I mean, let's think about it. If we saw this somewhat when COVID hit and the church buildings were closed. So many people struggled in our faith. Some still are. And I don't believe that's really by coincidence or accident. For, look, our faith is strengthened when we are in the Word, true to God's Word, when we trust and obey, when we're connected with other believers. And when we remove those things, we're weaker for that. And you kind of see that with Peter. When the band of disciples are together, you're a little stronger. When you're alone on an island, it's easier to join the other side. But even then, even if we put our faith in the church, our faith in our own ability, it's never going to be strong enough. For Jesus Christ is the only way for us to have true and lasting faith. So what about you? We stand on this trial that we're in, and we all will. We all will when our time on earth comes. We will stand before the Lord at the judgment seat. And he'll ask the question, why should I let you into heaven? I'd say, look, my daddy was a deacon in the church, or my mom was a Sunday school teacher, WMU director. I'd say, look, I did all of these great things for God. Tell you, if the words out of your mouth begin with I, you've missed it. Because the hymn says, what can wash away my sin? Nothing but the blood of Jesus. Jesus stood trial so that we don't escape it, but so that we can be pardoned for our sin. May we trust in Jesus.